Thank you for coming. In this course, we will study and practice logic and argument in writing. This is a very broad topic, but it's going to be very practical. So today we will examine the relations between writing, thinking, and reading. So let's begin with actual writing samples. Now, this is a short essay by a non-native college student. He was asked to read an article about intercultural communications. So it's about communications among people with a different cultural background. And this particular article talks about two theories that is mentioned in the writing prompt, assimilationism and pluralism. And the prompt asks the students to find the solutions to close the gap created by these two different theories. I want you to stop the video and see what the main idea, main argument is in this essay. Okay, welcome back. Now, if you look at this text, I underlined most passages this student wrote. And it happened to be that these underlined passages are all copied from the source text, except the last sentence. And then if you look at each paragraph that are copied, these paragraphs are really talking about the definitions of these two theories, assimilationism and pluralism. That's one important point. And if you look at the last sentence, that is the only original sentence that are not copied. The sentence is very similar to the writing prompt. From this message of the two ideas, I found the gap created by social view. And here, if you look at the prompt, each view reveals several strengths and weaknesses. What are some ways to close the gap created by two different views? So, in conclusions, this passage, this short essay is entirely copied one from the source text. So what does it tell you about the writer? The first one, the writer is not ready to answer the question. The question was finding a solution to close the gap between two theories. But the author is trying to find the definitions. So the author is trying to figure out what the theories are. So either he didn't read the book or he just didn't understand the source text. So there are some relations, if you look at somebody's writing, some relations between writing and reading and the person's ability to process the reading materials. And possibly we can kind of infer his thinking process going through this text. Let's take a look at another one. The same writing prompt. And if you look at this paragraph, the two passages are almost copied from the source text. And then we have the whole paragraph that are original by this author. So it's good that this person is trying to produce his own argument. So there should be some argument here about these two theories. But if you look at this text very closely, the copied passage is also trying to define each theories. This first paragraph was about defining assimilationism, the first theory. The second paragraph is about defining the second theory. And then even the third paragraph, the first sentence, trying to define each theory in the author's own words. So one is equally responsibility, another is socially differentiated. So, although we can find some argument here, we are not quite particularly sure whether this author can offer solutions that writing prompt asks him or her to do. There are a lot of factors in each theory, and knowing definition only might not help the writers to produce a sensible argument. So through writing, we can estimate knowledge or understanding of the writer. So writing and reading is related. And what pulls this reading and writing together is a thinking or strategies or methodologies the writers use in their writing. So this relation, there are some researchers or thinkers who have written about the relations between writing and reading and thinking. Among them, this is one of my favorite quotations by John Gage from University of Oregon. He said, "Writing is thinking made visible, thinking that can be examined because it is on the page and not all in the head, invisibly floating around. Writing is thinking that can be stopped and tinkered with. It is a way of making thought hold still long enough to examine its structures, its possibilities, and its flaws." So normally thinking is floating around in our head, but writing allows you to capture it, and then you hold it in long enough so that you can take a look for its organizations, its benefits, its problems, and so on. So that process is a thinking process writing allows us to do. He went on to say, "The road to clear understanding of one's own thought is traveled on paper. It is through the attempt to find words for ourselves and to find patterns for ourselves in which to express related ideas that we often come to discover exactly what we think." So he tells you that in the writing itself makes us think. So writing, we initiate, develop, and facilitate thinking. Now, this is quite different from what we have been doing. Normally, we often think writing is simply a tool to express your ideas. So you complete your thinking, and then you put it out, your completed thinking in writing. But the passages argues that the process of writing itself is a thinking process. So let's take a look at what we do normally when you practice this thinking writing process. This is a comment by these two authors about how students write. They say, most students believe that if they think clearly, they will write clearly. They thought they had to work everything out before they wrote. They acted the belief out ritually by not beginning to write until they had every book and note they might possibly need piled up on their desk. When student writers present their draft only in final stages, it is painful to accept criticism of the ideas and suggestions for major revisions. So this is the image of draft we are accustomed to. You pull everything, you learn everything, you gather all the information and try to put it in your head. And then once you have everything in your brain, and you put it out on your draft. And that's generally speaking, that's your draft that you submit to your teacher. So then you get some criticisms about the paper, and then in the second passage it talks about how difficult it is to accept criticism based on that kind of draft. Now, this tells you the normal thinking process. We try to complete our thinking in our head, and then we use writing to express that completed thought. And that's why we do drafting this way. Now, this can be problematic, but it's not always your fault. Teachers often think the same way and practice the same way. So let's take a look at examples. Sometimes you have a feedback for your paper like this. Elaborate, clarify, and specify, and things like this. These are three most commonly used feedback in writing. Now, if you have this kind of comment, some people would understand what specify means, but other people would say, well, my paper is specific enough. How can I be more specific? And so on. Maybe the student may think that teachers should be more specific in their comments or something. Sometimes teachers provide more extensive feedback. In these examples, the teacher offers feedback on each part, but then the teachers offer some global comment at the end. Now, sometimes this works, but a lot of times this doesn't work, according to research. And also my experience tells me that students just simply go through the feedback and then fix it mechanically. For example, here, in feedback 2, it says, begins a new paragraph. So beginning a new paragraph means a lot of things because you organize your thought in one paragraph. So when you produce 3 paragraphs, you have 3 kind of different ideas. And then when the topic shifts, you have to put a new paragraph so that readers can process the information. So beginning a new paragraph means a lot of organizational thinking. But some students would take this feedback and then just simply click and then enter and then produce a new paragraph as if that's done. That will be enough for this paragraph. So the idea here is that feedback could some feedback is not very effective in addressing the students' problems when they write. And also this tells us the difference between what readers think and what writers think. And there's some interesting research, one interesting research that shows the difference. So in 1986, the researchers named Stacy Burns and UCLA examined the writing process. So at that time, a personal computer was not widely available, so people used to use a typewriter like this. So you can imagine the writing process here. Sometimes you put some ideas and write it down, and sometimes you don't like particular expressions, and you erase it with white, and then you use a different words. Sometimes you don't like the whole paragraph, and it's very difficult to change it, so you took it out, and then you produce a new one. And then you have a new idea to stick in the paragraphs, and then you just take it out and then throw it away, and then put a new paper and then rewrite it, and so on and so on. So Stacy Burns captured all this process, and then argues that at the end of the day, after all this typing process, what you have is very clean copy of the writing. So when you read that copy, the readers will evaluate the writing based on the final product, while ignoring the entire process that the writers went through. So quality of writing is measured by the final product. Therefore, the process of writing is largely hidden. So this is the process. This is exactly what Peter Elbow is trying to address in this article, the one article that you need to read for this class. It's a very radical suggestions by Peter Elbow at that time, but now it's a commonly accepted wisdom in the field. So I'd like you to stop the video and then read this read Peter Elbow's article, and then try to fill out this form, and that will help you get a main ideas he's trying to develop in his paper. Okay, welcome back. Now, in this paper, Peter Elbow presents two different kinds of writing. Number one is critical writing. Number two is creative writing. Creative writing is something that energizes your desire to write. There are sometimes you feel like you want to write. You express your emotions. Maybe the rainy Wednesday afternoon. You sit in a cafe drinking a coffee, and then you may come up with some great poems. Or sometimes when you see a new television programs or you're talking to your friends, you get a new ideas you just want to jot down. Those are the creative energy and creative writing that everyone has. But at the same time, you have second types of writing, which is critical writing. Critical writing that makes you make a judgment about the quality of writing. My vocabulary is not good, my grammar is terrible, I never done serious writing them before, and so on and so on. So that kind of prevents you from producing a lot of writing. The problem, according to Peter Elbow, is this critical writing is too overwhelming so that it discourages people from developing the writing skills. So he wants to reverse the order so that people can begin with a creative writing, leisurely, very flexible kind of writing, and then move on to a critical writing later on. So let's take a look at a few issues from his writing. There are a lot of theoretical perspective, which is very easy to read, I remind you. And also there are some very useful suggestions in this paper. And this is one important paper I'd like you to read and remember. So in it, he suggests what he calls direct writing process. The procedure is very simple. Just divide your available time in half. The first half is for fast writing without worrying about organization, language correctness, or precision. The second half is for revising. So first draft is just you simply sit down and start writing. You don't worry about grammar. You don't worry about vocabulary. You don't worry about correctness of idea. You just put it out, whatever that comes to your mind. Nothing comes to you. You just say nothing comes to me, or what. And you can add some pictures. If you could, you can add some information from the internet and so on and so on. That's the first part. And the second half is revising that first draft you freely generated. So he tells you, for example, if you have 10 days for writing, the first 5 days should be spent on producing first draft, and then the second half will be spent on revising the draft. Now, this is pretty radical ideas, because normally we would spend 8 or 9 days, producing a perfect form, but he says you need to increase the time for writing flexible, free writing stuff. Now, to make this possible, there's two conditions. Number one, you have to make first draft writing easy. Remember, when you produce a perfect writing, perfect writing requires a lot of work, a lot of energies, a lot of thinking, a lot of revisions, and so on. But he says the first draft should be easier, so that you can produce a lot of materials. And then the second condition would be you spend more time on rewriting. You should spend more time on rewriting. Okay? Now, if you have 10 days, for example, it's the end of the semester and you have to write your final paper and you have only 10 days, and I don't think you would have enough time to write on to focus only on this project. You have other classes in exams or reading assignments and writing assignments and so on. So I don't think it's feasible for you to spend the whole 10 days on this project. So let's suppose you have only 2 days you can spend in the remaining 10 days. And normally what do you do if you have 10 days before the due date but can work only 2 days? Normally you do this. You leave only 2 days at the end of the, approaching the due dates at the end of the period. And then 8 days, you don't do anything. You're just worrying about the final paper. So I would suggest, if we apply Peter Elbow's idea, let's do this way. You spend 1 day early on generating first draft. And then last 1 day, you go back to your first draft and revise. Now, the difference is here in the first scenario, in the 8 days, you don't do anything because you have not studied. So this whole 8 days are is wasted. But if you do this way, once you have some ideas in the first day, during the 8 days, there are some moments that you may, some great ideas comes to your head. Because during these 8 days, your brain's still working. Okay? So, let's see how then your first draft looks like if we follow Peter Elbow's ideas. This is a typical image of first draft that students think of. You spend some days on rewriting and so on. So it's very perfect. You have an introduction, you have subcomponent, subtitles, and paragraph, and so on. But according to this is likely, you're not likely to spend a lot of time on revising because you try to complete your thought and then put it out on the last minute or 1 day or 2 days. This is kind of different from what Peter Elbow has been suggesting, particularly on first draft. First draft, according to Peter Elbow, looks like this. You have a picture, you have internet passages you got, and sometimes you have your own observations or your complaints and so on, and you have some quotations from the book and so on. So the first draft looks like this. You have some ideas, you gather some information from diverse sources, and you just put it out there, and then producing first draft. So if you spend this much ideas and you have some vague or rough idea about where this paper is going, then remaining 8 days, you keep thinking about this. So on the last day last day before the due date, then you kind of try to order this information in your paper. If you have some more information, you can add the information. You kind of allocate some information along the paper. And then you start thinking about what to put in the introduction, what to put in conclusions, and so on and so on. If you have more time on revising, your paper is more likely to be well organized, well ordered, because you keep thinking about locations of each different ideas. But if you produce only one draft in one sitting, you're not likely to have a very, very coherent paper. So, let me summarize. Peter Elbow's idea of writing is completely different from what we have been accustomed to. that ideas makes us do a first writing easy, right? And then we will spend more time revising the first draft. So throughout this course, I will demonstrate and you will practice producing these types of first draft. And then later on, we will work on how to revise those drafts. Okay? Thank you for coming, and I'll see you in class.